I'm Dr. Aparna Ahuja, Chair of AACC's Corporate Advisory Board. Our Corporate Advisory Board worked along with SYCL to put this panel of speakers together and host this program. And I would just repeat, because I saw that this is the first ever virtual Careers in Industry event. We welcome everyone. We are very excited to have you here and look forward to a very interactive event. Careers in Industry event was developed to provide professional development and networking opportunities to early career professionals. The speakers here today will each briefly share their career paths, expertise, experiences, and we'll have a little question and answers during the session, as well as after the talk. We will have more questions, and here, as this is virtual, I would suggest that you could put your questions in the chat, or you could even, I think there's this emoji, you can put your hands up, and I'll see that your questions can be directed to the speaker that you want should be answering, or you could keep it open-ended, and we'll have our speakers answer the question. Now I'll get this started, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank each of the speakers for being here today. And I'll just introduce quickly about each speaker, after which they will be sharing their career paths, expertise, experiences, and any advice that they have for each of us attending this session. We have Dr. LaShonda Bryce, who is from Diagnostic Astago. She's a Scientific Engagement and Clinical Education Associate. Then we have Andrea Lindsay. She is the Global Product Manager, Credel Ortho, formerly the Ortho Clinical Diagnostics. And Katie Markham, Global Marketing Director of Clinical Laboratories, Credel Ortho. Again, it was formerly Ortho Clinical Diagnostics. We have Deb Sier, Senior IT Customer Consultant at Roche. So without any further delay, I would request Dr. Bryce, if you could feel free to kick this off.
Thank you. Welcome everyone to this session, and thank you so much for having me as a speaker. As I was introduced, my name is Dr. LaShonda Bryce, and I work for Diagnostic Astago, but I've been with Diagnostic Astago for about a year. So prior to that, I had a long stint with the federal government, and I did several academic tours as a student. So in 2004, I entered into the academic side of Virginia Commonwealth University's academic campus, and then crossed over in 2006 to their clinical laboratory science program. In 2007, I began working in their hematology department, just running urinalysis and coagulation on the night shift, on their weekend night shift, to help supplement some of my costs being a student. After I graduated in 2008, I moved back to Texas and began working for the Air Force at their Trauma One Center in San Antonio, Texas, in their hematology department. About a year after I arrived back in San Antonio, I went back to school and got my master's degree because I had an interest in teaching. And at the time I was teaching Air Force students. Well, my path didn't stay on the straight and narrow. In 2012, the federal government decided to do base realignment, and I was transferred to the United States Army to Fort Sam Houston at their Trauma One Center, and then subsequently promoted to a lead technologist in the hematology department. From there, I entered into a different academic career, into teaching. And then once UTMB in Galveston opened their doctorate in clinical laboratory science program, I immediately switched over to their first entering spring class. While I was a doctoral student, I kept my full-time job at Brooke Army Medical Center in their hematology department. And towards the end of year 14, I was promoted to the supervisor. The whole time that I worked in my career path, I had very close contacts with many of my vendors. And a lot of the times my vendors would speak to me about potentially crossing over to industry, and I was very resistant. I wanted to complete my doctoral project before I considered any other career changes, and the military always held a special place in my heart, as both of my parents are U.S. Army veterans. At year 15, I, however, did decide to cross over into industry. So the biggest change that I ended up experiencing is, of course, coming out from the military and federal government. Before, the federal government provided me a lot of stability, and I stayed within pretty much one discipline. I stayed in hematology with a very short stint into flow cytometry. When I got employed with Diagnostic Estago, I was approached by several different aspects of employees in Diagnostic Estago, from a field service engineer to an IT consultant to their scientific affairs director, as well as their technical support specialist. So there are many people that played a role in making my decision to cross over to industry. As far as what happened to me academically and what happened to me as a teacher, well, the reason why this position with Diagnostic Estago piqued my interest was because it was going to offer me the best of both worlds. I am a unicorn. I have only worked in hematology. I have not worked in any other sector of the clinical laboratory. So when Diagnostic Estago offered me a hemostasis position, it was a no-brainer decision. And when I looked at the title and saw that I would be teaching, again, it was a no-brainer for me. I did not actually cross out of academia though. Subsequently, when I was a doctoral student, I was picked up as adjunct faculty at both University of Cincinnati and then later on at St. Louis University for the baccalaureate in MLS. So I never really let go of my academic side despite being in industry, but I think that brings a special piece to Diagnostic Estago, as it allows me to take the teaching aspects that I've learned with both University of Cincinnati and St. Louis University with adult learners and implement that across the various healthcare professionals that I provide education to. So a lot of times I get the question, what do you do? Well, teach. I teach all types of health professionals. I teach our bench technologists, I teach our PhDs, I teach nurses, pharmacists, physicians, clinicians of all sorts, any and everything that you would like to know about hemostasis, flow cytometry, and even new things like thrombin generation. Another question that I get a lot of times when I'm speaking to MLSs is, what is your travel like? Well, before it was pretty much zero. I would go to AACC or go to a conference or two while I was employed with the government. But now my travel is very high. So yesterday I came back from two hospitals in the Houston area where I provided some education on heparin-induced thrombocytopenia, as well as some additional information on some new assays that are being adapted to platforms. At the end of this week, I'll be heading up to Chicago for Clinical Lab 2.0. So why do I travel so much? Well, it's for networking, for teaching. A lot of times we kind of get trapped into this idea of using Teams only or Zoom, and many customers are not satisfied with that. Customers are bench techs all the way up to a medical director. Sometimes we just need that human element, and that is why my position has lots of travel. In addition to going to conferences, I also take those conferences as networking opportunities, not only for the company, but also for myself. As I mentioned before, I'm an educator, so oftentimes I want to display that this position is a good hybrid for those that are looking for a career in industry, but don't want to let go of that teaching spirit that they have within them. So thank you guys for listening to my journey in both academia and industry, and I'll be happy to take questions at the end.
Thank you. Andrea, could you please introduce yourself and share your career path?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Andrea Lindsay, and I am a global product manager with Quidel Ortho, formerly Ortho Clinical Diagnostics. That's how everybody knows us. But I started out in the laboratory. I'm a med tech. by background, and always loved microbiology and blood banks. That's kind of where my passion was when I came out of school and when I went into the laboratory. I actually worked as a generalist for a long time in laboratories and then moved up into management, was a lab manager. At one point, one of my reps was like, hey, we have a position open for a field application specialist and we think you'd be a great fit for it. It has, some decent travel and some kind of different benefits than what you would see in a laboratory. Would you be interested? And I said, sure. And so I joined Ortho Clinical Diagnostics about 10 years ago as a field application specialist and did that for a couple of years. I live in Idaho, so I covered Idaho and Utah at the time. And it was a fantastic introduction to the vendor side of business, which is, different than just working in laboratories. Again, some decent travel, but some different benefits as far as like bonuses and stuff that you wouldn't normally see within the lab itself. I did that for just a couple of years, and it was funny because, like I said, I gravitated more towards microbiology and blood bank, but then I became a chemistry field application specialist. So you never know where you're going to go, or where you're going to end up. But I did that for a couple of years, and then I actually moved into a sales role, which again wasn't something I'd ever really been looking for, but the opportunity presented itself and I jumped at it because I knew the customers in the area and I knew what was important to them, having been a customer myself at one point. So I felt like I could bring, more of a consultative view to my customers and help them as they're making a chemistry decision or a blood bank decision on what equipment to move forward with. So I really, really enjoyed that role. I did that for about 6 years, all over the Pacific Northwest. So my territory grew from just Idaho and Utah to include at times Washington, Oregon, Montana, Nevada, and Alaska. So I've been very blessed to get to see most of the West as part of my role, which has been amazing. And then just about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, I was looking for something else, an additional change, and had the opportunity. Again, my old salesperson came to me and said, he was in a completely different role, and he said, would you be interested in joining global product management? And I was like, well, that's a marketing thing, and I don't do marketing. It's not my gig, and I don't make brochures. That's not what I do. But he said, no, that's not what this role is at all. And I think you'd be a great fit having the med tech background and having been a customer and understanding what customers are looking for. So I moved into that role, and it's been an amazing opportunity. I've really gotten to have a voice in what our products, how they perform for our customers, clear to, what are maybe some additional markers or assays that we should be working on and developing. So, it's just amazing that this med tech role that I started with has given me so many opportunities to see so many people and to travel and to now have an actual voice in how the products that we create affect patients in the end, to be able to have to have these kinds of specifications for patient care. So you never know where you're going to end up, I think, and especially if we're talking to kind of a group of people that are new to our industry. I would definitely say be open to different opportunities, because I didn't think I wanted to be a salesperson. Loved my sales role. I didn't think I'd ever go into marketing. I love being in marketing. So that's a little bit of my career path. If you asked what a global product manager does, that's a great question. I'm still learning a little bit, even after having been in the role for a while, but essentially we manage the life cycle of products from development, discovery and development of the product through the use of it. And then if there's any on market product issues or questions, or maybe some changes and tweaks that need to come up or be made along the road, clear into discontinuation, sunsetting of it, and moving into, a different area. So, and I get to do that on the global scale. So what is, applicable or useful for the US is not necessarily what's needed for our partners in Asian Pacific countries or in Latin America countries or in the European team. So it's just amazing to be able to see all the differences and all the needs globally for this, for our medical world. So yeah, that's what I do.
Thank you, Andrea. I was just thinking, with you shared about your progression in the industry, different roles. So I just wondered if you could just share a little bit about how did your background bring value to the various roles and maybe the current role? Like, how's that background connected to what you do today? And how does it add value?
That's a great question, because not everybody that's in the roles that we have has a medical technologist background. But for me specifically, and what I'm kind of seeing with some other teammates, and Katie can remark on this as well because she's got a similar experience, but having that background of being a medical technologist and having have spent time in a laboratory and really seeing how the products that we're creating and bringing a voice to how it actually affects our customers and patients in the end is huge, right? Because we work with partners within the development process, whether it be in R&D or manufacturing or whatever, who have never even stepped foot in a laboratory. And they don't really have an understanding of how these products affect patients and customers. So, you know, they might say, well, yeah, we can have it recalibrated every other day and it's fine. But you talk to somebody who's worked in a laboratory and they're like, what are you talking about? That's terrible. You can't have that. You know, that's going to kill our productivity and we don't have time for that. So my background, bringing my background of having had that experience and knowing what labs are looking for and needing, especially today where there isn't a lot of staff, there's not a lot of laboratorians anymore. And we're asked to do more and more and more every single day with less, right? So the demands are just getting more and more. And we've got to figure out how to be more efficient and better partners for our customers. And having that background and having been there in that situation really gives me a unique voice to be able to say, this is acceptable or this isn't acceptable in this design, whether it be instrument design or assay design or, you know, even when you're talking software design. It's really, really important that we have people who have that experience and that knowledge base to be giving the voice to the products then practices that go into it.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I would now ask Katie if you could again share your career path and discuss more about your experiences.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, everyone, and thanks for having us here today and for joining to learn a little bit more about different careers in the IVD industry. So I also, along with Andrea, I work at Quidel Ortho, formerly Ortho Clinical Diagnostics. I'm the global director of marketing for our clinical laboratory platform. So those are our chemistry and immunoassay systems. My background took quite a bunch of turns throughout my career, but it's been almost 100% in the lab, just impacting it at different levels. So right out of college, I joined a microbiology laboratory, truly started from the ground up. I was a specimen processor, which for any of those on the call familiar with microbiology, it's not the most pleasant type of role initially. I'm dealing with the types of specimens that are submitted to micro, but it was a great learning experience on how the laboratory works, the roles of different players in the lab, the critical role of the lab in healthcare. And I really enjoyed the concept of microbiology in my undergraduate studies and learned so much about clinical microbiology in that first year or two where I was doing that. I then moved to a new location. I grew up in the Midwest and moved out to the East Coast and moved to Philadelphia, which was really exciting because it's a wonderful place if you want to work in healthcare. There's a lot of opportunities there. So I worked in a couple of different laboratories there. Again, on the laboratory assistant, specimen processing, billing type side, really learning how some of the operations of the laboratory works, handling specimens, send outs and all that sort of thing. Before I decided to go ahead and do additional schooling to be a medical technologist. So it took some time to do that. Really felt like that was the right career move and time to move into laboratory testing and being a med tech. And did that for a year before I sat for my ASCP exam. After that, I ended up specializing in microbiology. So I stayed with where my interests were. What I loved about it was so hands-on, interactive, and that you kind of had a little puzzle, not just every day, right? Every 20 minutes to solve for a patient to really help with their care. And as I got more skilled, right? You're dealing with the more complex puzzles for patients and complex infections and that sort of thing. So really loved my role there. I think what really drew me to laboratory medicine was a little bit of trying to make order of the chaos, right? There's always a lot of work to be done. You're getting pulled a bunch of different ways. You're having to focus on the patient and the task at hand. And so that kind of performance that you have to do on a daily basis was really attractive to me. But I felt after a couple of years of doing that, it got a little stagnant. You felt like it kind of, once you've seen everything, I was kind of losing that interest in terms of what I was doing. So I wanted to take a step back and look at how it was impacting the industry, what my different options would be. And I think there were a couple, right? One would to go continue into the medical field, maybe be more on the provider and clinician side, go into sales. So I know that's a very common pathway that you can take and play a huge role in supporting customers and laboratories in a broader way. And I wasn't quite convinced on either of those in those very direct paths. So I decided to take time off and get an MBA and really figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my career. And during that time, I reflected on, do I really want to switch industries? Do I really want to do something else? And at the same time, I was also getting really interested in marketing, because I like to understand why people do things and the psychology behind choices and what people like to do and how do you influence that. And luckily for me, when I was in between my years at the MBA, there was an internship available at Becton Dickinson. It was in their microbiology department, looking at informatics solutions for customers and microbiology. And I thought this is an absolutely perfect combination of my background and skill set and what I'm interested in. So I applied for that role and was accepted, and ended up working at BD after my MBA program in microbiology. So left the micro lab to go maybe change careers, and found myself right back into the microbiology world, working for a company that provides microbiology solutions all across the world. So that was such an education on the impact of the industry side of things. My first foray into product management, as Andrea said, it's quite difficult moving into a certain type of role and then going into product management and really understanding the scope of those types of roles and what you're responsible for is incredibly significant. So it was truly an education for me, and a development process over those years working in there. And then, like a lot of people in the pandemic, spent some time away from the office and really reflected on my growth trajectory, what I was looking for. And I think that's a little bit of theme is, I tend to look for other things as well. So wanted to maybe look outside of the organization and look for a different opportunity in a different company, a different type of role. And what I was really looking for was a different organization that was in a different part of the laboratory. So at the time, ortho was a really great opportunity for me to expand into a different area of the lab, focusing on clinical chemistry and immunoassays primarily, or even transfusion medicine. So all of those were things I hadn't had experience in. I did in the laboratory, but not on the industry side. So joined ortho in 2020 and was a global product manager for the infectious disease assays. So during the COVID time and all of those crazy things, experienced all of maybe about 5 years of work and experience, all condensed into about a year, I'd say, of developing and launching products on the market under EUA was an absolute incredible experience and an education. So that was a great experience. And then in April of last year, moved into the role for the marketing director for our platform. So I have a team of product managers who manage the life cycle of our immunoassay and chemistry systems.
Thank you. Katie, I have a question. What's the value of having an MBA? You must have, yeah.
I think it's different for everyone. I hadn't had a lot of background. There was a little bit in terms of operations and finance that were taught whenever I was taking the med tech, right? It's really about how do you operate a laboratory? How do you manage your expenses? How do you look at cost per test? Those types of things. But it really depends on the person, right? If you feel like you don't have the background, you don't understand operations, you don't understand some basic finance concepts, those are things that are really, really helpful if you want to move into a business type role. It doesn't have to be for everything, right? If you want to move into something that's more quality focused, regulatory or QA, I would say that the MBA isn't as important, right? You own your knowledge, you have your knowledge, you understand the industry and the clinical expertise. But going into more of a business type role, whether it's marketing, finance, product management, project management, all of those are really great ways that you can, like an MBA can get you there. It really can expedite your growth. Instead of having, you know, a couple years where you need to do some different types of roles to get that experience. So really just accelerates your experience. And then personally, if you want to take time to take time off in your late 20s or early 30s or whenever, any age you want, right? Go get your MBA, but it's also a great time to take a year or two off for yourself and work on, you know, learning and developing.
Thank you. Thank you. Now over to Deb. Look forward to hearing more about your experiences and career path.
All right, excellent. Hi, everyone. Again, thank you for joining us today. I actually have been an East Coaster my entire life. I've always lived in like the Northeast region of the United States. I started also as a bench tech, basically a generalist. I did rotations through chemistry, urinalysis, hematology, blood bank, coag. I think the one area I didn't touch that much was micro. You know, maybe early in the day we would just do some basic bleeding and stuff like that, but never really went through the steps and stages of a micro section or rotation. I went from being a bench tech to, you know, doing the manual reports that everybody maybe might remember. I'm not sure the age of the people attending, but we used to do all manual reports, handwritten translations, calling everything to the, you know, to the floors, to where computer systems became very important parts of laboratory and hospital working operations. So from there, you know, really took a liking to the IT infrastructure, really learning and understanding how laboratory information systems actually functioned within, you know, how you built your calculations that you used to have to do for, you know, EGFR and 24-hour urines, anion gaps and stuff like that, where we would manually be, you know, calculating those formulas to having a computer system do that for us. So I went from being a bench tech to being what they would refer to back in the day as an LIS analyst. So I learned on a SunQuest system how to actually build and manage and maintain a laboratory information system. From there, I became the manager over top of the laboratory and really just worked with, you know, a bunch of different systems within the hospital, from a hospital information system to the LIS, the interface engines that connected the two systems, billing reports, you know, having to make sure that everything was getting billed out so that we would get reimbursement from insurance companies. Just really taking my laboratory knowledge and understanding the CPT coding and stuff behind the scenes actually is where I learned a lot of that stuff being a laboratory manager. From there, I actually got courted from SunQuest as my first industry position. So they were an LIS vendor. So I became an implementation resource for SunQuest information systems. So again, taking my laboratory knowledge from being a generalist and being able to apply it and teach hospital organizations what the best practices were to build their information systems to run their laboratories efficiently. It was actually really a nice step. That was probably, from a travel perspective, the most travel that I did in my career. I was there for about 10 years and I covered basically anywhere within the continental US, Canada, and I've also covered London over in the UK side of the house. So really a nice little bridge from our regular operating of healthcare in the US to a socialized medicine model in Canada and the UK. Just really learning how, you know, the systems work differently, the expectations, and applying it to a virtual environment was actually really exciting to me at the time. I eventually did move into another industry position with Ventana Information Systems. So Ventana is actually a subset of Roche Industries right now, which is my current employer. I have been with them for about 10 years. I had started in the anatomic pathology side of the house. So, you know, pathology, you know, you get something removed from your person and it gets sent down to the pathology lab for analysis. So really understanding the difference between what a generalist would experience with receiving tubes of blood versus actually doing analysis of, you know, for cancer diagnostics and stuff like that. So really kind of took another left step in my career from an IT perspective. Not only having to interpret what the processes were, but also how to apply that in a virtual environment. I'm now actually within Roche, again, been here 10 years. I'm on the IT sales side of things now. So again, the steps between keeping open minds and looking at, hey, what do I want to do next, or what do I want to be when I grow up? Basically is it's very different in the industry side of business than it was in the hospital. Typically, if you're in a hospital, you go through the path of being a bench tech, being a supervisor, being a manager, maybe potentially aspiring into like director and VP level. It's a pretty straightforward path, but you don't have the opportunity to potentially do like a marketing stint or, you know, a sales perspective, because like hospital business does not necessarily offer that kind of opportunity. In industry, I've actually taken a lot of sideways steps and forward steps. You know, learning different franchises within industry is a nice feature of making the bridge over to this side of career development. And also just, again, keeping that open mind from an IT sales perspective. Having a laboratory knowledge and having my implementation experience from SunQuest, putting those two pieces together really helps me in my current role to set expectations when I'm going in and having conversations with clients about what are their current pain points, what systems do they use now, and where do they want to improve those systems? Like what is information or data sets that they can't attain right now? Is it something that our products can help them out with? So really using that historical knowledge that I've gained through my career path is setting me for success right now in my sales role. You know, and just really, you know, still looking to see, I always do tend to say, you know, opportunity knocks when it's appropriate. So always looking to see what the next sideways or forward step that I may make, but still very content in the position that I'm taking right now. So a little bit of a different path than some of the other folks on the panel today, but still very much interesting in the way that it went.
Thank you, Deb. And you explained very nicely and in detail about how the career progression within a clinical lab or hospital setting is different from corporate, and what are the various skill sets and how you made this progression. There's one piece I wanted to ask more about, is about the cultural differences and the shift between a clinical lab hospital setting to corporations like ours?
Mm-hmm. So there is still, I would say the patient focus is slightly different. There is still very much a patient focus in both avenues. In the hospital, you have to, you know, it's immediate patient care. I need to get results out so the clinician can provide treatment plans or care plans for that particular disease state that we've identified through the testing that we've provided in the laboratory. When you get into an industry, it's still looking at patients, but it's one step removed. So it's developing the assays to deliver to that laboratory so that they can produce the results for diagnostics. So it is still very much a patient-focused centric in the role, but it's just at a different level. So I do want to say, as far as, you know, the differences, it's, you know, it's, again, we're all here for the patients. Doing now what the patient needs next is a common response from Roche. But again, it's just at a different treatment point, I would say.
Thank you. And I would like to take this question to Dr. Bryce. In your perspective, what were the cultural shifts that maybe you observed and that you believe that our attendees participants should be aware of, that exists between the moving from clinical lab to corporate side?
So for me, I have a lot more interaction on the outside of the laboratory than I would have had within the laboratory. At my previous position within the hospital, my interactions with clinicians were very specific in hematology oncology. In this position, I'm interacting with the total healthcare system, meaning when we look at an assay, I'm not looking at the assay in the context of staying within the laboratory. I now have to look at the assay's impact and interpretation, not only for the laboratory and pathology, but outside to pharmacy, to nursing, and to other clinicians. And even going down and drilling down into where the clinician's specialty lies at. So one of the advantages that I was able to bring as a DCLS to Diagnostic Estago was some of the experiences I had as a DCLS student in residency. So now I can understand why internal medicine has a different viewpoint on an assay than the specialist does. So those cultural differences were not new to me, but they're much more expansive for me in my current position.
Thank you. And Andrea, what's your perspective on the cultural piece? Because that's something that we believe is important for the clinical lab experts if they want to join industry. I think that's something that is always on their top of their mind, like what is going to be the cultural changes? So Andrea, if you have any perspective on that, you're on mute, Andrea.
Sorry, double mute.
Thank
It gets me every time. So yeah, no, that's a great question because it changes, with every role I've been in within this organization, like the differences I've seen on my interaction or how I would interact with the laboratory, or for me personally moving as a med tech from the lab to industry has been a little bit different. So, when you move from the laboratory itself, right, you're very interactive with your team there and you're kind of knee deep in the work, so to speak, right? And then you move to the vendor side and then it's a little more hands off and you're a little more on the outside, but as like an application specialist, you still have a lot of interaction with the lab. So you're going into these places and still working with them, whether it's implementing a new assay or an instrument, and you're still doing a lot of the similar work that you would be before, but you're not having to punch a clock or, do some of those typical things that you would do day in and day out from a laboratory's perspective. Then you move like into a sales role or into a marketing role, and it becomes even a little bit more removed and more business focused versus, day in, day out patient focused and like just trying to get a result out. So it's kind of shifted with every single move I've had. But it's all been a great learning experience for me. And then it helps me, like, as I look back on my previous experiences, like I have to remember what was important at that level so that it can, help me, be successful in this role right now. But yeah, there's definitely a different cultural feel with every single role. And even moving from like something that is regionally a regional role versus, like with my sales role or my application specialist role, you're just focused on the U.S. needs. And now, in a global role, we have to remember what's applicable globally, not just what the U.S. needs are. So it's my cultural views have shifted dramatically over my full career, which has been an amazing experience.
Thank you. And I just wanted to mention that we have exactly about 19 minutes for question and answers. So please ask your questions in the chat or just raise your hand and we'll get you to ask a question if you want to do that. So please feel free. And while you type your questions or raise your hand, I have more things that we could discuss and more questions to ask. So I would ask Katie this one. As a senior member, what are the mentoring or training which is provided to new members who join your team? I mean, somebody joins from clinical background, would there be enough mentoring and training opportunity within the organization that they could feel comfortable to making the change?
Absolutely. I think, first, it likely very much depends on the role and the size of the company. But certainly any of the major organizations or companies involved in IBD have fairly robust training programs. And if you're certainly on a customer facing side of things, it's very well defined. But what the great thing about coming from the customer side or coming from the laboratory, for most companies in the industry, you are seen as experts, right? Like you are nuggets of fantastic information and insight that they have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for in reports and interviews and those types of things, right? So, the good news in terms of shifting your careers and coming from the customer side or from the laboratory is that you are already an expert and have a lot of credibility And so good companies and good organizations and good teams can recognize that and both value you as you're going to come in with a lot of great ideas, opinions, and perspectives on whether it's product management or quality or anything like that. So you'll be able to make an immediate impact even without training, just from your own perspectives and knowledge base. And then, good organizations will provide an incredible level of training and mentorship as you progress throughout your career. In my experience, I've had, the luxury of having great bosses, great managers, and then other people that I've gotten to work with that weren't my direct managers, but people who, saw potential and helped me develop from a business side of things. And even those softer skills, right? Personal relationships, developing, sort of a sphere of influence, connecting with other people. Those types of skills are not, things that you necessarily need in the laboratory, but are incredibly important when you want to get things done in a business environment. And so that type of development and mentorship is incredibly important. But the good news is you're starting from a great position of strength because you have the right perspective from the customer side of things, and good companies, good managers, and good people will recognize that.
Nice, thank you. And I can see a hand raised here. Kate, would you want to go? Please go ahead.
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity and thank you all for being here. So my name is Kate. I'm a fellow at WashU, and I have noticed a few other fellows on this call. So my question kind of pertains to, I guess, coming into industry after fellowship. So for me, my background is PhD straight to clinical chemistry fellowship. If my next career move were to be in industry, what kind of job titles or responsibilities should I be looking for? Yeah, that's the question. Thank you.
Great question. So would Dr. Bryce, would you want to take that?
Sure. So my supervisor is actually a PhD biochemist. He completed his fellowship at Temple University, and he is the scientific business manager for Diagnostic Estago. So fortunately for him, he gets the best of both worlds. So he gets to manage this wonderful person known as myself, and he also gets to manage a wide portfolio of products. So he has minimal managing of people experience because he only has that one employee underneath him. However, that does not preclude him from, participating in being a mentor towards me, but it also gives him the opportunity to have us work as a team and show the teamwork that can be displayed between a PhD clinical chemist and a doctoral scientist from the clinical lab. So for Diagnostic Estago, it kind of represents a team of R&D plus bringing the customer voice to the clinical laboratory. So another role that could be a potential for a PhD is also on the educational side. So in our R&D department, a lot of times our PhDs will go into the educational side of R&D. So they're not necessarily on the bench creating the assays, but they are going to be the front-facing partners that we use with some of our key opinion leaders.
Thank you. And I can see Ashwini, you got a question too. Please go ahead. You are mute. You are muted. We can't hear you. No, I can't hear him. Oh yeah, you are muted. I can see that. Take your time. And meanwhile, I would ask if
All right. Did anybody else have a freeze? Okay.
Yep.
I'm not sure. It's that wonderful hotel Wi-Fi. I'm just going to add for Kate's question while we're waiting for Ashwini to medical scientific affairs is usually a division a lot of industry-based companies have. So you may want to look under like a medical scientific affair title or division of the company. to see if there's anything there that drives your interest. We have some clinical specialists that are PhDs that kind of help with specific assays. So it's really kind of a nice avenue that you can branch out as well. So just a thought there.
Yeah, I can add, I think, and even within those roles, right, it can be very different what you can do. You can be very much involved in education and sort of downstream engagement, like LaShonda was saying, but also on shaping clinical strategy for the organization, right, to taking your education where chemistry is going in the world and then helping an organization shape how they develop assays, what types of assays, kinds of technologies are going to be there, what clinical practice looks like. Those can be really interesting roles that I know a lot of companies are looking for, those future thinkers on how do we shape our clinical strategy and making better products for the future.
Sounds good. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. And it seems I got kicked off, so I'm back. and Ashwini, did you get to ask your question? I don't know what I missed.
I think he dropped off as well. Unfortunately, I think his headset may have been muted. Oh, there he is. Is your headset muted?
I can see him, but I can't hear him still. So maybe you might just want to put your question on the chat so that we can get it answered for you. And I will continue because I thought maybe I could ask another question meanwhile while Ashwini types his question. Andrea, I'm going to put this to you. What would be your metrics for success in your role?
Oh, getting some feedback from people. No, that's a good question. So metrics for feedback or metrics for success in this role are, we're always looking at how are the assays performing? Are they performing well? Especially if it's a newer assay, are we getting many complaints within the field? Or is it being adopted by the different regions at a decent rate? And are they having success with the assay? How are the cells for each assay? Those are some of the big ones. But then just feedback from our regional partners, because in this role, we don't necessarily work directly with customers. We work with regional marketing teams in each area because it's hard to understand the regional needs across the world. So getting feedback from those regional teams is really important to make sure that we're doing, and helping develop these products correctly and managing their life cycle correctly.
Thank you. Thank you. And I can see now, I'll just read out, I'll help Ashwini here. So that's Ashwini Nepal. He's the Principal Scientific Affairs Specialist at PPD, part of Thermo Fisher Scientific. And he's got a question for Katie or Andrea. What was your motivation to switch to product management from marketing and vice versa? What is the right question to ask during informational interviews regarding different positions? Interesting question. So that's for Katie and Andrea.
Sure, I'll start. And thanks for the question. It's an important one. And so one thing for certainly is get clarification on how the company defines product management and marketing. In some cases, a product manager does the entire thing. We call it, right, soup to nuts, end to end. So from product concept to downstream marketing. Sometimes you're very much upstream, meaning you're doing the product strategy and development up to a certain point, and then there's a handoff process where you're not really getting to see any of the products launch or anything like that. So first, just defining what those are, because sometimes they can be flexible. So a product manager role can truly be you kind of own an entire portfolio of products, and you're managing the life cycle, including new development and all the downstream products. So clarification first on how the company defines those roles. And then in terms of my choice, it's always a fun question people ask when you're interviewing those types of things is, do you prefer more of the strategy side? Do you prefer more commercial strategy and downstream marketing type things? I personally like both, and I never like to choose. So I try to find roles where I get to impact both things. But I do really love strategy. So for me, as long as I can think 3 to 5 years in the future, I'm happy, and that's usually a guiding principle when I'm looking for different roles or opportunities for me. So a lot of it's thinking about, how long you like to work before you make an impact, right? Or do the things that you implement are immediate. You get immediate feedback from them, or are they going to happen a couple of years down the line? And that might help you decide what type of role you'd like to pursue.
Thank you. That's really insightful. Andrea, do you have any comments? Anything to add?
Yeah, just to add on that a little bit, you know, like what was the motivation to move, you know, outside of the previous role into marketing? And it was really, you know, looking for something different, looking to be able to have more of an impact on the products and how it affected customers and patients down the road. That was really impactful for me. And then getting, like Katie said, getting to drive strategy and, you know, helping to drive the business, that was a huge thing for me. So I actually had looked at leaving the company and moving into a different sales role at that time, but then this opportunity came around and, you know, it was too good to pass up. So, you know, something totally different that was not something I had the experience to be part of before, but to get to, you know, do different things and to launch initiatives and really help drive and focus and shape a company was really impactful for me. And that's what helped drive my decision to move.
Thank you. And I hope, Ashwini, you got your answer. And I'm keeping my eyes on the chat. And meanwhile, while somebody types another question, I do want to ask this. I think mostly I feel that the question always comes up, what is the best way to look for a job? And I would say, if it's possible for each of you to answer, because it might be a little different from every company, I mean, the companies that you work in or you've worked in the past. So Deb, could you start with answering this question about what's the best way to look for a job?
So again, I'm going to kind of go off of like what LaShonda had started her conversation and her history with. Sometimes it's talking to the vendors that if you're at a bench level in a clinical position, just speaking to the vendors, asking them how they like their current employer, what are the benefits to it, like just really, if you're familiar with the instrumentations or the products that vendor is already deploying, sometimes that's usually a good first step in the industry because you already have the knowledge and the expertise around that particular thing. And then just going out to the websites, right? Like a lot of the websites post a lot of different positions with different, you know, descriptions of what that job entails. Again, leveraging those contacts that you'll have from your day-to-day operations is actually probably the best step. If you just want to kind of throw a dart at the wall, I would say look at some blogs. A lot of the vendors have blogs and stuff like that. Users, I forget what their terms now. They're user groups technically, like so that you can actually start getting a feel for what the user groups and what the users feel if it's a company that you're not familiar with. So yeah, there's a lot of different avenues. It's really just doing your research, you know, and asking the questions. Don't be afraid to ask the questions, not just the initial questions, but the second and third level questions as well, because that's really gonna help you make that decision.
Thank you. And LaShonda, would you kind of answer? Thank you.
So yeah, I'm gonna stick with what Deb had said. It's
Hello.
I think she froze.
Yeah, I think we're having some challenge here, but I can have Katie or Andrea if you could.
Okay.
Oh, LaShonda, you're back.
No, she's back.
Okay. Well, it didn't look like I was not, but
yeah,
I was gonna say people. Another way to do that would be LinkedIn. So sometimes people will become connected through LinkedIn, and a vendor will recognize that person throughout their tours of the laboratory and connect with you that way. So keep your LinkedIn open, and of course network at large conferences, AACC, laboratory-based conferences, and be sure that when you're at these conferences, visit your vendors, and even if they're not in your region, make a connection, and then someone else may make a connection through you that you may not be aware that you're doing.
If there are no more questions, I would still, since we have another minute, I would still like to ask one last one is, How do you, and maybe I'm going to ask LaShonda this one, is how can you be broadly informed to influence decisions and changes with the KOLs, the key opinion leaders?
So keeping up with being active in different societies is the best way for me to engage with and keep up to date on any changes that are done in scientific committees. So being from hematology, I am a member of ISLH for International Society of Laboratory Hematology, ISTH, and being active within different subgroups at AACC is also helpful to make sure that everyone outside of those specialists is also aware of any key updates, because we know that the laboratory has experienced some shifts, even in non-core laboratory sections, going to a more core laboratory format where information must be shared to ensure good patient care.
Thank you. And being cognizant of time, we are at time. I would like to mention and thank the speakers today on behalf of AACC, the Corporate Advisory Board, and SYCL. And I also appreciate the participation and active discussion. So thank you so much. Have a great day.